Between 1980 and 1983, the Illinois Department of Corrections made an early release of over 21,000 inmates in response to a prison crowding crisis. During this period, over 5,900 prison years were averted, and the prison population was reduced by approximately 10%. Among those released in 1981 were a powerful Gangster Disciples board member named Charles Doherty's, aka Coal Black, and feared Black Disciples minister Michael Bull, better known as Mickey Bull. And they would fight each other and the other predominant gang in the projects, the Mickey Cobras, for control of the profitable drug business operating out of the Robert Taylor homes. In the year 1959, there were big plans to build the largest public housing project in the world, right here in Chicago. These projects would stretch 2 miles in length, cutting all the way through the Grand Boulevard neighborhood, and stretching into the northern blocks of the Washington Park neighborhood. These projects would consist of 28 buildings that were all 16 stories high, having 4,415 units between them. These projects would literally be able to house an entire decently sized town, with a population between 10,000 to 30,000 people. This was a whole new isolated society being built in the midst of the Bronzeville community. The projects were named after Robert Rochon Taylor, who was chairman of the Chicago Housing Authority from 1939 through 1950. Robert Taylor worked to integrate public housing projects into mixed race and mixed income neighborhoods to prevent racial segregation of the housing projects and avoid a disadvantage for African Americans if the projects were built in slums. Taylor had a grand vision that would have worked, but Taylor's superiors did not listen to him and began to build public housing for African Americans in black ghettos, causing Taylor to resign from his position in 1950, and he later died in 1957. 2 years after Taylor's death, the new massive projects began construction in his name, which is a major slap in the face to Robert Taylor's legacy, and the government used his name to make it look like these would be Robert Taylor approved projects. A great way to cover up a segregated housing plan. The Egyptian Cobras, now known as the Mickey Cobras, or MCs, became one of the first significant gangs to move into the projects as soon as the buildings opened in 1962. The Cobras moved into the buildings near 45th and State, then ventured southward throughout the 1960s. The Cobras also moved into the cluster of 3 buildings in the Washington Park neighborhood at 53rd and State, known as the Hole. The Del Vikings were another gang that moved into the Robert Taylor buildings early on and developed a very strong presence. By 1966, the Black Disciples began colonizing these buildings, and their size and strength eventually rivaled the Cobras. That year, Michael Mickey Bull Johnson moved into the Robert Taylor homes and became one of the first disciples in these projects at the age of 12. In 1968, Mickey Bull led a group of disciple heavy hitters, called the Vanguard, in the takeover of several buildings from 49th and Federal to 53rd and State, where the Cobras maintained control of the buildings known as the Hole at the age of 14, and became the leader of the disciples in the Robert Taylor homes. In 1969, the Egyptian Cobras, then known as Cobra Stones, opened the first major drug operations in Chicago public housing history, in the Hole, which were the buildings located at 5326, 5323, and 5322 South State Street. All hell began breaking loose that year, when elevators started breaking down, and gangs became increasingly violent, spraying graffiti, and inflicting injuries on each other, and many others. There was also a major increase in robberies and purse snatchings, especially since the neighborhoods surrounding the projects, in Grand Boulevard and Washington Park, had fallen into an extreme state of poverty and increased violence. In 1969, issues only worsened when a nationwide law made residents only pay a percentage of their income for rent, instead of a flat monthly rent rate for everyone. This allowed unemployed and barely employed residents with sketchy backgrounds the ability to move into these buildings. Many of them had drug problems or gang affiliation. By 1972, the Robert Taylor projects became the site of hopelessness and despair, while most other project complexes would sustain better conditions until later years. The Robert Taylor homes went into a downward spiral very early in its existence, as heroin took a powerful hold on the people living in these towers. The Devil's Disciples, Del Vikings, and Cobra Stones ran these buildings with an iron fist in the 1970s, and had successfully pushed out smaller gangs. Gang wars between the three organizations became increasingly murderous in the 1970s, as they threw objects or shot guns at rival members from on top of the high rises, but many times, innocent bystanders were struck. Gang members chased each other through the hallways, and often threw each other over the ledge. This led to the installation of steel chain link fences that gave the residents a feel like they were prisoners or animals in a caged zoo on display. The solution that was desired was to enclose the breezeways entirely, but it was said that it was too costly for CHA's budget. In the year 1981, there became a clear divide on the streets between Black Disciples and Black Gangster Disciples. Mickey Bull Johnson of the Black Disciples made sure several buildings controlled by the Robert Taylor Disciples followed Jerome Shorty Freeman, and the majority of the Dell Vikings became Black Disciples that year. The rest of the Dell Vikings joined the Black Gangster Disciples when Robert Cold Black Doherty's was released from prison and moved into these buildings. He recruited all of the other disciples to follow Larry Hoover and the Black Gangster Disciples, later known as just Gangster Disciples, which ended up being the slight majority of the disciples in these projects. Still, in the midst of all of this gangbanging, poverty and pain, beautiful roses blossomed through the concrete. Former wrestler and actor, Mr. T. Hall of Fame baseball player Kirby Puckett, the 71st governor of Massachusetts, Deval Patrick, and comedian Corey Holcomb, at one time or another, all called the Robert Taylor projects home.
I don't have to be rich beyond my wildest imagination, you know what I'm saying? I got what I need from the project. It don't take much for me to be straight. I got a fast car, and I got access to a lot of girls in poverty. So I'm winning.
Black Disciples leaders like Jerome King Shorty Freeman, Mickey Bull, and Don Dirk were released in 1981, but Chairman Larry Hoover, the leader of the Gangster Disciples, remained in prison on a 1973 murder charge. At first, the BDs and the GDs divided up drug territory through negotiation because, in theory, they were allies under the Folks Nation, but then the crack epidemic hit, changing everything.
In an article, originally published in the Chicago Tribune on June 18, 1989, titled, "Fear Lives in CHA's Taylor Homes," the author cites a composition by a sixth grader from the nearby Beethoven School, to kick things off. For the last few days, whole lots of things been going on, like shooting, killing, dying, death. That happens every day, every week, any month. Like, they tried to kill my cousin, my uncle, almost tried to hurt my grandfather, to take his money. Everywhere you go, you see people on streets, in abandoned buildings, on the corners, breaking in houses, getting stopped by police. Every day, the same things happen. In an apartment at the Robert Taylor Homes, a group of young entrepreneurs conduct weekly business meetings to discuss revenues. They sport designer jogging outfits, and thick gold chains, that are the envy of their peers. The men fill out ledgers detailing the work shifts and salaries of their employees, elementary school pupils, who are paid $150 to $200 a week to yell, "1151, as a warning when police approach. Sometimes, sales of their product must be increased, in order to raise bond money for a jailed colleague. The product is drugs. The byproduct is violence. In an area plagued by chronic unemployment, narcotics is a tempting alternative to a welfare check. It has been the means through which drug dealers have been able to buy expensive cars and clothes. But, for the many law-abiding residents of the Taylor Homes, the largest public housing development in the world, it has simply brought more bloodshed and intimidation. Over the last few months, violence has escalated at the complex, forcing tenants to flee or live like hostages. More and more, drugs and crime dominate the lives of the residents, including the very young. There are more participants, more people willing to sell it, said Police Officer Tom Compinga, of the Public Housing South Unit. And everyone is willing to be arrested to make that money. When asked to write compositions about their daily lives, children attending the nearby Beethoven Elementary School write almost exclusively about gangs and drugs. Of 18 sixth graders asked to write spur-of-the-moment accounts of their lives Friday morning, 16 students mentioned crime. Last week, there were gunshots in the neighbor, and it was an automatic Uzi, and it shot about 20 times straight, wrote one student. Everybody also running, police came, but didn't get any because, they've hid their gun under thing. Another wrote, my sister knew this girl, and she got shot. And these boys was shooting at these other boys, and almost missed my sister. According to police, much of the violence is triggered when turf boundaries are challenged at gunpoint. Allegiances shift overnight, as gang members vie for lucrative markets for cocaine, and karachi, a potent form of heroin that often is mixed with barbiturates. It's going to blow up eventually, all-out war, a dope war, said police officer Edward Bone, of the Public Housing South Unit. They're very organized, well-armed, and we have a lot who don't care about when to squeeze the trigger. These guys can't shoot, so when they come out with these Uzis, it spray the area. For many who live in the sprawling 28 high-rise Chicago Housing Authority complex, the war is already underway. Our story about the Robert Taylor homes is a long way from over, but please, put some pressure on that like button, and subscribe to the Cartoon News Network, if you're not already a part of the family. And if you're already, La Familia, like and share this video, to expand the movement.
One gang leader, who until recently exploited the lawless environment of the Taylor complex is, Robert Doherty's, known to residents as, Cold Black. According to police, Doherty's, who is not a resident of Taylor, ordered a 10 p.m. curfew last month, in order to limit competition around 4101 South Federal Street, and gain control of the building. They tell them, if they catch them downstairs, they'll pop them, said a resident of the high-rise, who requested anonymity. As soon as it gets dark, whoever is standing there, they just start shooting. Doherty's, 32, who was charged with murder earlier this month, controlled drug trade in at least 8 high-rises, at the north end, of the 2-mile-long Taylor complex, police said. An ex-convict, Doherty's, began operating at the Taylor homes approximately 3 years ago, according to police. He was assigned the territory in Taylor by a gang leader whom he befriended while in prison, police said. He starts recruiting these youngsters, who look up to him, said John Risley, of the Gang Crime South Unit. They see him in the jogging suits, and the gold chains, and rings, and all the money. I've seen him in an '89 Chrysler, a Cadillac Eldorado, and 2 or 3 brand new Chevy Blazers, none of them in his name. While Doherty's has remained in Cook County Jail in lieu of $300,000 bond, police say that little has changed in the buildings he controlled. They expect another gang member to take his place if he is convicted. You know what? The police were right, other gang leaders did take his place, and the war with the Beatties was just getting started in 1989. So, the cycle of pain and poverty continued for many, but life and laughter blossomed like a beautiful rose through concrete for others.
But you keep mentioning certain things. I'm curious to know this. You keep mentioning women in poverty. What's your... Well, I'm older now. I'm not as young as I used to be. So, women in poverty, I can control them better. A girl who can't afford to say, fuck you, Corey, I'm gone. She just can't afford to do it. So, I take advantage of that. Now, that might be wrong, but her poverty and my needs, most of the time, it even out. I don't really need a lot of their time. And they don't tell me to fuck off because they know when I come over, their children can get some outlet Jordans. Outlet Gucci. Yeah.